hello, this is Kim Russell with Tunnel Talk. Hey James, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Kim. Glad to be here.
So it's been a while.
It has been, yeah, it has been. Lots been going on in the world. Things are getting
What's
interesting.
what's going on over there in Australia?
Well, the last week, haven't heard much of it the last couple of days, but a few days last week, the the tradesmen, the construction workers, they went on protest marches, and there was quite a lot of them. They walked onto a busy freeway and basically shut it down. And there was a lot of them. There were thousands of them. Of course, the media lied and said there was only a few hundred. And there was agent provocateur episodes where the news crews were conveniently situated on a rooftop and they're aiming their cameras down. And they had the stage scene where these police cars would drive into this plaza area and they get pelted by all these rocks and you can clearly tell that the provocateurs, these were cops. I mean, they're big, they're buffed. They got mask on, they got ski mask on, but you could clearly tell that the whole thing was staged to make the construction workers and what they call here the tradies, the tradesmen, to make them look bad.
Where'd you
And
say
that
this?
happened constantly.
Where did it
The
happen?
local news, the local news has been not just the local news, but the national news has really been demonizing the protesters, right? So every opportunity they get to create a false scene, a false narrative, they do that in order to discredit the protesters, who of course have legitimate grievances, right? So the last few days in Melbourne, they've had a major militarized police rollout, hundreds, if not thousands, of cops walking around in formation. They've got an actual counter-terror squad using an armored personnel carrier, and they're all out in their anti-riot gear kit. And it's very much an intimidating show of force. But I must say that the Victorians, Melbourne is the largest city in Victoria. They showed their true mettle. They showed that we're going to be accounted for. That we're just not going to roll over. So much credit goes to them. And now, from what I'm hearing, a lot of the tradies, so-called, the construction workers, they're having issues because a lot of them feel like they're being intimidated by the police because I mean they're very visible in their high visibility vest and yellow jackets and whatnot, and so there's just been a lot of that going on, a very large police presence. So hopefully, the world got to see what the Melburnians, the Victorians, are made of. I think that every Australian that wants freedom, wants to just be left alone. I think they can look at what happened in Victoria the last week or so with some degree of satisfaction that they made their voices heard, and this happened after the truckers. They call them truckies here, but when the truckers made a point of blocking a lot of the major roads and not delivering goods as a form of protest because they were trying to force certain mandates on them in order to cross state boundaries. The state boundaries here are sealed off. One cannot go from one state to another. It's they've got everything isolated here. So it should be understood that some of your listeners will be familiar with Stan Deyo. And to refresh people's memories, Stan Deyo was an American who worked in Pine Gap. If memory serves, he was there in the 1960s and 1970s. And then he started coming out with information in the late 80s, thereabouts. And he put out some information and he started going on speaking uh, appearances, and I happened to see a lecture of his in San Diego. And what I was hoping for was for Stan Dale to talk about, some of the exotic propulsion systems he worked at Pine Gap, but he was probably still under, uh, you know, non-disclosure oaths or statements or whatever you want to call them. So he gave a very limited hangout as far as the propulsion systems he was aware of and that he worked on. But what he did say publicly and what he did uh, point out in his writings was that the information he gleaned from his time in Pine Gap, Australia, and if your listeners are any of your listeners are not familiar, Pine Gap is in the center of Australia, near the town of Alice Springs, also near the Aboriginal sacred center called Uluru, not too far from there. Pine Gap is a space satellite facility, and they provide satellite imagery, communications, and what have you to the intelligence community, to the military. And a lot of us have suspected for decades now that Pine Gap also is an Australian counterpart. It's run by Americans. It's operates under the auspices of the Americans, the CIA, the NSA, the National Reconnaissance Office. And what Stan Deo said was he found out in his time in Pine Gap that Australia in the future would be the model for the New World Order, that they would bring in tyranny, dictatorship, a technocratic control system, and it would first be implemented in Australia. And there's a history behind that. Australia has kind of developed independently from the rest of the world. It's isolated. It was set up as a penal colony, and one could argue, make a cogent point that it never stopped being a penal colony. The rules and decrees and the mandates and the edicts are given in abundant profusion, and this mentality has developed where you have this hereditary ruling class, not much different from the hereditary ruling class in other countries. It's all part of, as you know, the New World Order network of these ruling elite bloodline families. But here, because it's so isolated, relatively speaking, these two mentalities develop, which are codependent and enmeshed. And one is the ruling elite, plantation owners, if you will, this dictatorial, tyrannical mentality, right? Which goes clear back to the time when they first brought convicts here. And, convict is a relative term. Some people were really convicts and they, broke laws in England. Other people were just little children or what have you that maybe were accused of stealing a turnip or stealing an onion or something, right? And they wind up over here. So you have the prison warder, prison guard, if you will, group, and then you have the prisoner mentality group. And there was a lot of bad karma that came about as the result of turning Australia into a penal colony, what they call the First Fleet here, 1788, when the first prisoners were brought here. And for many years, you would hear the old timers say to one another, "Are you of convict stock?" Right? Which meant, were your ancestors brought here as convicts? So that, I don't know, I don't hear that much from the younger generations, but I heard it a lot from the older generations. I don't know if they said it with a sense of pride or what have you. So you have the prison guard mentality, and then you have the prisoner mentality. And it must also be understood that Australia is a snitch society, right? What they call dob, or to dob in, or being a dauber, which means basically being a snitch. And you can see it from the politicians, the health ministers, who are constantly telling people. And you have to see these daily press conferences to believe them. The level of verbal abuse, of narcissistic abuse, of bullying that these politicians and health ministers and police commissioners, how they mete out this verbal abuse to the viewing audience every single day, hectoring them, badgering them, telling them to obey, to follow the rules. And it's because some people don't follow the rules that we're going to have to extend these lockdowns. And, and you only get your freedoms back when you follow the rules, right? So there's probably certain words that, may get people banned from, certain platforms. I mean, I've recently had one of my videos on YouTube banished, right? Let's just say certain treatments. What's that?
You know what? And we'll call it the treatment.
The treatment, yes. If you watch their press conferences, and it's every day, Monday through Sunday through Monday, just every morning at 11 a.m.
And who is giving those press conferences?
The premiers of various states,
like
the
prime ministers and.
Yeah, well, the prime minister, in theory, sits at the top of the government, and then you have the premiers, which would be likened to governors in America of each individual state. And then 11 a.m. every morning, they give a press conference, right? Updates, basically. Excuse me, where they try to terrify people with, more cases and all this other stuff, right? So you can set a stopwatch. You can hold your cell phone in your hand, and you can get it going the moment the press conference starts. Within 40 seconds, you're already hearing treatments, right. Treatment rates, rate of treatments, and it's just a constant barrage, and the hectoring, the badgering, the scolding, the belittling, and the majority of Australians just accept it without comment because that's what they're habituated to being told what to do, to being berated, to being told they're stupid and worthless, and that's a big part of the problem is not just the acquiescence and the obedience, the blind obedience to authority, but like I said, this is a snitch society too, where everyone from the prime minister, that are premiers, police chiefs, that they're encouraging and basically, telling people just to snitch on people, and that happens constantly. Where if there's two or more people talking in a park, someone's gonna come along and report them. If there's a small gathering in a park, or if a neighbor sees one or more people going to another person's house in the neighborhood, they'll call the police. It's a snitch society, and it always has been, long before this current madness we're in. So you have these facets of the situation where you have this prison warder, sadistic prison guard mentality, which flows from the military and the federal government all the way down to even local bureaucrats, right? You have the prisoner mentality, right, where the rules, the edicts, the mandates, no matter how absurd, no matter how ridiculous, must be adhered to without question. And then you have within that framework, you have the snitches, which, form a big part of the whole setup. So everything that's done here in a form of a protest, that's because there's such a small population base, it's much easier to regulate and control. They just swarm any given area with hordes of cops, right? And if you remember back in the days of the Clinton era, Iran-Contra, because that was really the Bushes and the Clintons working in tandem with each other. And then you had all the problems with when the Clintons, Bill and Hillary, were the governors of Arkansas, and all that illegality that came out of there. Airport, the cocaine trafficking, everything else. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton used the Arkansas State Police as essentially their own Praetorian Guard, as their own own security force, their own intimidation force, right? The entire apparatus of the state of Arkansas police. We have a very similar setup here where, I'm in the state of New South Wales. There's only one police department here. It's the police of New South Wales. In Victoria, where Melbourne is, there's only one police department. It's the police department of Victoria. So you have this very large police organization run by the chief of police of a given state, who follows pushes all these orders and decrees and mandates determined by the premier, the health minister, et cetera, et cetera. So when Stan Dale was talking about how Australia was going to be the model for all this, he wasn't just blowing smoke. Now, a lot of us took notice of that, and we talked about it amongst ourselves. Why would Australia be the model for this kind of tyrannical setup? And it's precisely because some of the reasons I'd brought up earlier. It's a relatively isolated place. It is isolated. I'm not a believer in Darwinianism or Darwin, but there's something to the notion that when a certain species is left to its own devices in a remote location, it develops in its own unique way. And because of the psychic karmic scarring, when they first came here with the first fleet, where they were literally going around in hunting parties, just literally shooting and killing every Aboriginal that they saw, man, woman, and child, it didn't matter, enslaving the Aboriginals. It wasn't until relatively recently that Aboriginals were even considered human here. Aboriginals, for a long time, were part of the Flora and Fauna Act. They weren't even considered human. They were considered like flora and fauna, like a plant or like an animal or something. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the mentality here. So it just shows, just how brave these protesters are and how courageous they are. Because, especially if there's not going to be a large turnout to a protest march, they're just going to be so outnumbered by the militarized police. They'll just be swarmed upon. So, and of course, Australia was disarmed because of the false flag Martin Bryant event. Well, we're supposed to believe a mentally retarded boy with a 67 IQ, gunned down all these people in Port Arthur, Tasmania. Complete nonsense. He's still riding away in isolation if he's still alive. The Martin Bryant case was important because that was the justification for the Australian government and the state governments to
when
decree.
was that exactly?
That was in the 1990s when the Martin Bryant, and they've tried to scrub as much of this off the internet as possible. Bryant. It was the shooting in Port Arthur, Tasmania, and overnight the federal government decreed that all firearms must be turned in. Right. So, and then because of that acquiescent, obedient, rules are rules mentality, because in a psychological sense, they're just weird amongst the masses, this weird kind of sadomasochistic relationship that the citizenry has with the government. And there's a very large segment of the population that, because they've been told for so long generationally that they're just basically, stupid prisoners that need to be told what to do and to be, accept whatever they're told without question. And because of whatever psychological hangups they still have, if they've come from prisoner stock, convict stock, right? And you see overcompensation all across the board in the behavior of a lot of Australians. And it comes out in cinema, it comes out in other things. But we're led to believe, if you just go through the TV Hollywood narrative, that Australians are very edgy. They're kind of over the top wild men and wild women, and there's an element of truth to that. But there's also an element of overcompensating, I believe, right? So when they invent pastimes like planking, like laying stiff as a board on a high ledge somewhere, or they invent bungee jumping, right? It gives you the impression that, oh, these Aussies are really over the top. They're crazy. But that's kind of misleading because the vast majority of them are slavish, servile, sycophantic, uh, obedient people with a prisoner mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And by saying that, I'm not talking about the people in Australia who I could consider the real Australians, right? Who I consider to be the real Australians who are against all this. They make up a distinct minority, but it's growing, right? But the majority of people have this servile, sycophantic mentality, and it traces back to how this country was formed as a penal colony, and even when moments of clarity and truth pop up, right? Like, for example, one of the top commanders in the Australian Army, Ted Sarong, Serong. You can't write this guy off as a conspiracy theorist. He was a high-ranking officer in the Australian Army. He was part of the contingent of the first Australian Army training team in Vietnam, right? And he considered himself, and many considered him a crack shooter, marksman. And he said, his analysis of Port Arthur, the shooting of all these people, most of them died with headshots, right? He said only the top shooters in the world could have made these kills. Because in a normal battlefield, there's usually like a higher ratio of wounded than they are to killed by bullets. In Port Arthur, a disproportionate number of the victims were killed by headshots. And eyewitnesses describe multiple shooters, and we've heard this over and over and over again, right? Multiple shooters, the Washington, D.C. snipers going on after 9/11, and then in Mumbai, in India, when there was these roving packs of clearly white mercenaries that were going around shooting people in a black op, which was blamed on terrorism.
And
Ted
even the
Sarong
one here
said,
in Vegas, right?
I'm sorry?
The one here in Vegas at the
Yes.
Mandalay
And then you
Bay.
see the video from Vegas. There's different firing points from different windows. There's helicopters flying around, blasting away. So Ted Sarong said, if this kid, this mentally retarded boy with an IQ of like 67, if he was really able to do all this, that makes him one of the best shooters in the world. And he said that means he can shoot better than me, and I'm one of the best shooters in the world, is what Ted Sarong said, right? Okay, the exploits of shooting all those headshots in Port Arthur would make Martin Bryant on a par with the best shooters in the Delta Force and SAS, right? But see, that part doesn't get out to the media. It's just, a mass shooting, but so many of them died with headshots, you see? So that was a justification. Overnight, hundreds of millions of firearms were turned in, and really that sped up this whole process we're at now. So, in a nutshell, and again, I'm not here to disrespect the real Australians, many of whom are my friends, right? But the vast majority of people, probably even more extreme than even some of the most blue cities and blue states in America, the socialism, the communism has become so entrenched in the schools and the institutions here. Many Australians are communist in mindset, and they don't even know they're communist in mindset, right? This is why it's like this East German Stasi snitch mentality. And long before this current madness, they were snitching on their neighbors. They were snitching on other people for the stupidest, lamest, trivial reasons. It's embedded in the culture. So that's another thing that people have to, come to terms with when they try to understand what's happening with Australia. You have the hereditary, and I would argue that like I said, in the Darwinian terms, it developed, this country and its institutions developed in a way, it's a big laboratory, ongoing laboratory experiment. And the ruling class, we know that they're hereditary. We know there's some degree of inbreeding amongst them to keep their reptilian bloodlines, relatively pure. I would argue that it's even more extreme here in Australia. When you look at some of these people on TV berating the viewing audience, they don't even look human to me. They look like they're just full on foaming at the mouth, reptilian hybrids. And they just berate, scold, and hector and badger the viewing audience. Tell them stupid, absurd things. Like if you see your friend, your neighbor in the supermarket, don't talk to them. Don't go out and watch the sunset. You're endangering everybody, right? They have a thing here called the bubble friend. I didn't even know what they were talking about. I kept hearing people talk about it. Who's your bubble buddy? You have to register onto the government, the state government website, and put the name of the person, the one person who's authorized to visit you, right? And I know someone who, they were celebrating their birthday, so they had a friend come over, and they were playing music, dancing, and drinking, just the two of them. A neighbor narked them off. Cop showed up. Is this person your bubble buddy? Oh no, it's not my bubble buddy. It was someone else that was not the bubble buddy. But the neighbor saw fit, to narc them off. And then I know of another occasion where, a couple of young people, a guy and a gal, they're, in their 20s, late teens, they get a flat tire and they're parked out across the street from this lady. And then the lady looks out, her window, and there's a couple of kids there standing around looking at their flat tire. What are they going to do, right? So eventually they had to get a tow truck out there and go through the whole process of getting the tire repaired. But in the meantime, the lady called the cops on them. So the cops show up, right? That's what I mean. See, and they try to outdo each other with snitching. Did you call the cops? Did you call the cops? It's like it's expected. So that's something that should be understood. The mentality. I was fooled. Watching all the cinema. Oh, AC/DC, and these cool bands that come out of Australia, and you see movies, right, about the Australian culture, and it gives a very misleading notion of what the mentality is really like. So there really is this weird sadomasochistic dynamic where a large proportion of the population, they rather enjoy the government holding the whip hand. Because they've been accustomed to it through generations. It's embedded in their DNA now. They want the government to be forceful, to be intimidating, to be in your face, right? So this is what those in this country, who want freedom, that's what they have to contend with, is they're living in a snitch society that puts East Germany back in the Cold War days to shame. And you've got the whole other dynamic, and I'm not going to, I spent a lot of time talking about this already, but there's certain places here that have already been set up as Chinese Communist, People's Liberation Army bases. They basically own their own big airport in the western part of Australia. If you go to big cities like Sydney, for all intents and purposes, Sydney is an Asian city. It's a Chinese city. And I'm not impugning the loyalty of the many Chinese Australians. I'm just saying that nothing would be simpler to infiltrate through generations worth of infiltration. Dedicated, hardcore communist Chinese into the fabric of the society. And they've already, bought and paid for so many members of parliament, and they have built such an infrastructure here So when I hear this stuff about how, see, the big news here is that, excuse me, Australia signed this deal with America. It's the ACASA or whatever the heck they're calling it, treaty, New Zealand, Canada, US. It was always the Five Eyes from an echelon NSA, GCHQ standpoint anyway, but now they've formalized in a different way where Australia would build under license US naval submarines here, right? And you know, from a surface level perspective, one would think, oh, this is a long-term thing here to perhaps in the event of an eventual war with China, you know, the submarines that are built and based here can work against the Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. But that's nonsense because the Chinese, just as the Chinese pretty much own, because the Chinese are the new strike force of the New World Order, just as they pretty much own America already, they certainly own Australia. So, you know, when I see these contracts being let and the submarines being built, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Australian Navy is going to be the ones crewing those submarines, right? Because down the track, you know, if the Chinese and if, you know, the way things are trending, you know, if enough people in the military and law enforcement and the bureaucracies don't wake up, right? See, there's this notion that, oh, if I opt out for a treatment, suddenly I'm on your side, right? I don't believe that. Like, for example, there are countless nurses, paramedics, etc., that are opting out of the treatment. That doesn't mean they're on my side because they were gleefully administering these treatments before to people. But now suddenly, you know, their services are no longer required. So they're expected to get the treatment and they're going, oh, I opt out. Well, that doesn't absolve them of their crimes against humanity.
Right.
They're still guilty. And there have been a number of police that have opted out. That doesn't put them on our side because they were gleefully enforcing these mandates. And look what they're doing in the U.S. military. See, people don't realize this. But when Digital Pedo Joe decreed through, you know, his master's decreed that, you know, with the phony approval by the FDA, right? And now everyone in the military is supposed to get the treatment. People don't realize that if they refuse the treatment, they become dishonorably discharged. And in America, it's a federal law now in the books that if anyone for any reason is dishonorably discharged from the military, they lose their Second Amendment. Now think about that. The right to bear arms.
Wow.
So already we have that. That's de facto Civil War stuff.
This
What's
is
that?
so well planned out.
It is.
So
it is
well planned out.
So this notion that all this is gearing up for a war with China, yes, it could go to a shooting war, but the intention is to wipe out the U.S. forces. So they're just going to be sacrificed in some fruitless war trying to defend Taiwan. They're going to get wiped out. It's a woke military. It's not a professional military anymore. The great generals and admirals of the past not only would they not recognize the U.S. military, they would see it for what it is, the enemy, permeated top to bottom with Luciferians, communists, and what have you. So the point of relevance is dishonorably discharged because they won't take the treatment, automatically lose their Second Amendment, and that gives the gun Gestapo in America, the ATF, and the feds, the FBI, the excuse, and they've already been doing it, to go after the veterans with the firearms. So de facto, the Civil War in America started because as those dishonorable discharges continue, and you have thousands and thousands and thousands, because they don't want people with empathy who can think for themselves in the military. They want, especially if they're white and they love their country and they're Christians, oh, terrorism, right? Kick them out. So they're identifying themselves, but there's an inverse to that too. What these people in America and Australia and the UK, what they don't understand, I'm talking about within the institutions, within the military, within law enforcement, within the bureaucracies. What they don't understand, mostly because a lot of them are completely out of the loop and don't know all the details, and they fit a psychological profile anyway, which would intellectually prevent them from understanding any of this. What they don't understand, but history has shown clearly, is that the communists don't share. The communists don't share. Once they take over, with the help of the local communist, with few exceptions, they get rid of the entire infrastructure, which paved the way for the communist takeover. And their justification is, you betrayed your own people. Why should we trust you? So when these cops say, oh, wait a minute, I'm a 32nd degree Freemason. I enforced all these mandates and all these edicts, and I, cracked a few skulls. Chinese political commissar will say through a translator, what's your point? We don't need you anymore, right? So that's going to happen too. So what we're talking about are, General Milley, the highest ranking officer in the American military, known to be a communist agent. So all of that factors into all of this. So anyway, it was a long-winded way of explaining just how Australia wound up in this situation, how Port Arthur was used as a means to, and it's that servility and sycophantic acquiescent mentality which enabled millions of Australians without demur to just give their guns away. Whereas in America, with the Second Amendment, oh, wait a minute, look how many times the Democrats in particular have had all these false flag shootings, right? During the Democratic administrations, they still haven't gotten the guns from the Americans, and they ain't going to get the guns from the Americans, because now they see an object lesson of what happens to a country that's disarmed. But we also see this in the European Union too, which, remember, they're disarmed too. And it's part of the Covenhof-Kalergi plan to flood the West with these unassimilatable, if that's a word, immigrants. And now, and it's all tied in. What's happened in Afghanistan now is par for the course, where all this equipment, all these huge bases, which were built with a lot of tax money by, DynCorp, Halliburton, Bechtel, all the usual suspects, at tremendous cost. They built up all these bases, and instead of guarding them and making off with the equipment and destroying what they couldn't be brought with them, like any normal army would do, right? They leave it to the Taliban, who they've been fighting for like 20 years, right? 2 days before that bombing at the airport in Afghanistan, the CIA chief shows up and meets with the Taliban leader. The U.S. Marines, where the bomb went off, were told there was a countdown that a suicide bomber is going to show up and he's going to blow up. So the Marines were told that there's going to be a suicide bombing. Now, I don't believe the mainstream narrative. It could have been a car bomb. It could have been a charge planted in the roadside, whatever, right? If it was a suicide bomber, so-called, he could have been narco hypnotized, could have been under mind control, whatever the case may be. But the end result is you have this scenario where the Taliban, who are now essentially going to work with the Chinese, have been given free rein to take over Afghanistan after the CIA created the Taliban and propped them up and ensured they came into power back in '96. So what we're seeing is we're just seeing a handover now. You have the Belt and Road Initiative through Afghanistan to Pakistan, where the Chinese have a large, port facility set up there. And also another thing that needs to be brought out too was when Henry Kissinger said years ago now that in 10 years' time, Israel would cease to exist. That was a real head scratcher for me. It's like, well, because there was such a focal point, Israel, the whole Anglo-Zionist empire. I just put it on the back shelf because I couldn't make heads or tails of it, right? Now, with all these treatments, I can see what they mean, because a lot of those people thus treated were themselves active or former active duty members of the IDF the Israeli Defense Force, right? Now, after 9/11, there was the expansion of the Haaretz Israel, Greater Israel scheme of things agenda, where they systematically set about balkanizing, destroying, destabilizing all these Middle Eastern countries, invaded and destroyed Iraq twice, and then fomented the Sunni Shia conflict, right? And then, basically destroying all these moderate countries, including Syria, which they've essentially destroyed. So I just thought that agenda would continue. Okay, now they're going to destroy Iran in some way, right? Well, what if? Because China has now made Iran partners in their Belt and Road Initiative. They've got the Taliban on side. And what we've seen with the treatments, how it's decimated Israel. Now, what Kissinger said all those years ago, which didn't make sense to me. Now, I'm not saying this is the case, but maybe they won't destabilize and destroy Iran now. Maybe they don't have to anymore. But I think that the plan is to destroy the American military from within and without, and by creating a scenario where the U.S. would have to come to the aid of Taiwan, defensive navigation. Something may occur in the Malacca Straits in the South China Sea. Something might happen. And now Australia is caught in the middle. They already have these financial arrangements with the Chinese government because there's this effort now to move away from the petrodollar. So the Chinese financial system has already been interlinked with the Australian financial system. So the Australian government could easily move away, if told to, from the petrodollar and just let, the petrodollar just, wither away, right? Which would cause problems, of course, for the U.S. But so this notion that Australia is going to be this big time ally of the U.S. to fight against the Chinese, that's a non-starter, because the U.S. is being prepared to be wiped out militarily against the Chinese. So it's very interesting. And anyway, to round out that point is, if you look back in history, everywhere the communists have gone, whether they're Chinese communists, Soviet communists, whatever the case may be, often as not, one of the first things they did upon consolidating power is they get rid of the local minions because they don't need them anymore and they don't share. So, I'm not saying this because I want to save, all these minions that are, enforcing all these mandates and what have you. It doesn't, I don't care what happens to them. They deserve their fate as far as I'm concerned. Another thing, too, that we must understand is these treatments, especially the ingredients in them, it's possible that we know that some of the ingredients have a transceiver aspect to them, sending and receiving. We know that they have algorithms built into them that allow them to self-assemble and, around the brain and other places. So the possibility exists that if someone takes these treatments, not only eventually will they shed their mortal coil and die, right? But it's possible their consciousness, their soul, or what passes for it could be caught up, enmeshed in this kind of AI quantum cloud where their consciousness would have to endure this Tron-like existence in this hellish quantum cloud, another dimension, forever. Okay? So we've already seen in Queensland where a number of police have opted out, right? Now, what they don't understand is when they opt out, they're automatically putting themselves behind the eight ball because they've already identified themselves as dissidents. The Chinese commies were going to get rid of everyone anyway. But the fact that they've opted out, that puts, them way behind the eight ball. So if this trend continues and if these enablers continue to turn Australia over to the Chinese, and the Chinese will be very strategic about it. If they're going to use nukes on Australia, it'll be to take out certain key military bases, right? Maybe Exmouth and, the northwest part of Australia, this secret naval communications facility there, or maybe they want to keep it intact, who knows, for their own purposes. Same thing with Pine Gap. I know in the underground bases in America, in the high desert, there have been, Russian and high level Americans working with each other. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's some kind of deals being worked out that maybe just turned the lot over to the Chinese. We don't know, right? So anyway, I've been yakking for a while now. I'd like to hear your thoughts on all this.
Gosh, okay. So, can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah,
Okay. So, didn't Pine Gap used to be, or isn't Pine Gap one of the major strongholds left in the underground bases? Like, wasn't there a lot of uh, alien presence there in Australia?
a lot of us suspected that. Bill Hamilton, who used to be really active in the field, but I think he's pretty much retired by now, if he's still on this side of the veil. He developed a lot of sources in the Antelope Valley, the aerospace corporations underground in the Antelope Valley of Southern California. And what his sources told him and what he'd heard through research was something similar was going on in Pine Gap, where there was alien technology being worked on and being tested. Uh, People, well, back in the day when they still had firearms in America and Australia, there would be hunters and there would be hikers and backpackers, and they would be out on the fringes around Pine Gap. And at night, they would see craft, like saucer shaped craft, come out of silos in the ground, right? And other people had described seeing craft, multiple craft, hovering right over the base, right, at night. So similar to Area 51 slash S4. And when I was at Rachel one night, 3 a.m. in the morning, I saw 7 luminous, uh, elliptical shaped craft silently fly over my head out of the test site and headed to the northeast, right? So things like that have been alleged to go on for a long time at Pine Gap, and I recall Robert Dean saying, the late Robert Dean, I'm sure you remember him. He talked about how a colonel in the military, I think he said it was an Air Force colonel, told him that there was a portal set up in Area 51 slash S4, somewhere in that complex, where an individual would step through the portal in Area 51 and pop out in Pine Gap.
Wow.
We also know that the high-speed magnetically levitated trains, which are super fast, that if they didn't go to Pine Gap, I'd be greatly surprised, because Pine Gap is uh, it's a major satellite tracking facility and intelligence gathering capabilities through the roof throughout a large part of the world, not just the Southeast Asia, Asia, and the Western Pacific. I mean, it's linked with the whole global echelon NSA spying grid, right? And Pine Gap provides a lot of, for example, a lot of the drone attacks in Pakistan and different parts of the world, really. A lot of that intel came from intelligence uh, systems out of Pine Gap. So that they were using the facilities. It's an American facility, and all the key positions are staffed by Americans. There was an Australian guy who worked there years ago in the 70s as an electrician, and he was blowing smoke at me, right? I said, well, what do you know about the underground base there? He goes, no, mate, there is no underground base there. I go, there is an underground base there. He goes, no, there isn't. I used to work there. I said, you didn't have a need to know. You're out of the loop. Because this notion that they would have all these command control satellite tracking facilities only on the surface and nothing underground in hardened shelters to survive, uh, you know, nuclear blast and EMP pulse waves, et cetera, et cetera. That's nonsense, because even in a regular mundane kind of base, right? Nothing like Pine Gap, you still have underground facilities. You still have, redundant systems underground. That's just the way it is. So when this guy was telling me that, And again, it's an example of ego being a block to learning. In his mind, I don't know, it's because Australian pride or something, or just he was just a knucklehead. He thought, well, just because I worked there, I know everything. That's nonsense, right? He only worked on the surface. He had a very limited access to stuff, and he had no idea what happens on the surface, let alone what happens underground. So Pine Gap is a big part of the New World Order setup. And if someone wants to get an idea going back to the 70s about Pine Gap, read the book The Falcon and the Snowman about Christopher Boyce, the spy who worked at TRW. TRW has been involved in a lot of strange things over the years. I don't know what their name is nowadays, or if they've been amalgamated by someone larger. Um, but yeah, he talks a lot about what the CIA was up to, what the NSA was up to, a lot of the operations that were going on at Pine Gap, how they were interfering with the local politics and interfering with the trade unions in Australia. The CIA were doing this, right? So, but what we've seen in Afghanistan, I know I'm hopping around, but it's all related. It's just the transition. CIA chief was there 2 days before the bombing to meet with the Taliban, who they created, and now it's like been a handoff. Okay, now the Chinese are going to run with the show, are going to run the show over there. And so, this notion that all this stuff is geared up, yes, I can see them fomenting a war between China, the U.S., maybe Russia's involved, maybe Iran. But the U.S. military has been so ingrained with the notion of fighting these limited wars where they're never intended to win them anymore, and hasn't been since the Korean War, right? They just get into wars to advance some kind of hidden agenda. So I can easily see a scenario where the U.S. the military is suckered into getting into a fruitless, hopeless, unwinnable war. And see, the American military people who are loyal to the Constitution, loyal to the Republic, they're in a rock and a hard place. Because if they love their country, if their parents have thought they're white, right, and they love their country, they're Christian, and they believe in the Constitution, they're already behind the 8 ball. So they're trying to root them out anyway as being extremists, right? Now, with these mandates of the treatments, everyone who doesn't take it. Now, as far as I know, an officer can still resign his or her commission, but as far as an enlisted person is concerned, they're still obligated, a contractual obligation to finish their hitch in the military. So if they opt out, then they get dishonorably discharged. Their Second Amendment is taken away through some flimsy justification, and that gives the gun Gestapo, the ATF, and the other feds an excuse to go after them. They've already been dying in droves in these VA hospitals all over the place with the shoddy, flimsy, callous treatment of all these veterans, right? I mean, there's nothing new about that. So now, they're going to root out all these loyal, patriotic Americans. The only ones that'll be left are the order followers and the Marxists and what have you. So are they really going to fight that hard against the communists? You see? Mm-hmm. So all this is being geared up for this technocratic state run by the, enforced by the Chinese, the technocratic global state enforced by the Chinese, but at the behest, the Chinese have their own ruling, hierarchical, Draco, reptilian bloodlines, which go back into ancient times. Right. And everything that we've heard about the European royals, all the evil, sordid things they do, the Chinese hereditary rulership has done the same, or can even exceed them in cruelty. Right. So it's a match made in hell, if you ask me. And one point, and I know I've been gabbing a lot.
No.
Your viewers, right? You're here because you took on the toughest assignment you could take. You could have incarnated anywhere, in a higher dimension and said, F that earth assignment, right? Mm-hmm. But no, you chose to come here at a time when we, humanity, real humanity, not the sheepanoid, hybridized, version of humanity, but real humanity, the higher dimensional, soul connected humanity. You're here because we need you to be here. So, I applaud you, and I thank you for your service here in this time. We really desperately need you.
And you too, James. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, the the next question was, I heard, I think a week or so ago, that really Area 51 is ruling the world, is in charge. That's the main base for for the New World Order. Is
Well,
that something
there's
you
something
heard?
to that, because as we know, corporations rule everything, and these industrialists and financiers and the corporations they run, they they manipulate and bully boy governments to do their bidding. So they get the governments to enforce socialism, poverty, restrictions, while the industrialists live high on the hog. So if you look at that model, remember, folks, at the dawn of the aviation era, after the Wright brothers, first developed powered flight, within 10, 15 years, there was only a handful in America and Europe of what we would call now aerospace companies, right? Just a handful of them. And eventually, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers provided seed money to all of them. The Rothschild seed money went into Lockheed way back when. So, whenever you think Lockheed, whenever you think Skunk Works, the F-117 Stealth, whenever you think of back engineered alien technology, what Ben Rich, the late director of Skunk Works, hinted at. He told Jim Goodall, who was on my show, Jim Goodall, a world-class expert on the stealth, on SR-71, et cetera, who developed his own sources in Area 51, who'd worked with alien technology or been around alien technology. And Ben Rich had told Jim Goodall, we have things out there, meaning Nevada desert, that are 50 years beyond your comprehension, Jim. He didn't say 50 years beyond your understanding of engineering or 50 years beyond your understanding of aviation. And he said 50 years beyond your comprehension, right? So all that, and Ben Rich went on to say, in what amounted to a deathbed interview to Tom Kelleher, aerospace consultant for MUFON, he said that these technologies, alien technologies, and I'm paraphrasing here, they're tied up in these special access programs, these SAPs, these deep black uh, R&D programs where billions and billions of dollars are being funneled into it. So it's a black hole as far as finance is concerned. And Ben Rich said that it would take an act of God to pry them out of corporate hands, because that's essentially what happens. Is usually, it's probably not the case in every instance, but say a UFO and a real alien craft crashes, right? The military will be there, secure the site, bring it back to a secure facility above ground or underground, maybe do a preliminary analysis. But eventually, a lot of that technology winds up in private, i.e., corporate hands, right? Because we know that the Federal Reserve basically is a foreign bank owned by Europeans. So they're the ones who control the federal government, who really, runs things, right? So these technologies, alien technologies in places like Area 51, yes, one could make a cogent argument that it's the test bed where they're developing a lot of this technology. And I would argue that whereas Ben Rich said, we have a small fleet of craft that are based on alien technology and the military, travels the stars, I would argue they have a much larger fleet than a small fleet. They've had a lot of time of development on their own. And as you can see, um, this technology, as Ben Rich said, it would take an act of God to pry it out of corporate hands. This technology has not benefited humanity. If anything, what we see with Google, what we see with Apple, and one can make a cogent argument because of the connections with DARPA, and the original iteration of DARPA was the Joint Army Navy Research and Development Board from the 1950s, which was deeply involved in alien technology, right? Research and development and back engineering. So we can see that what technology has made it into the public sector, if you will, and made it into normal everyday society, those were all technologies that were geared up for purposes of control. All the digital devices, Apple, etc.,
Mm.
Google, etc., that's not being used to benefit us. So yes, when you say that, I would say that it's all part of the same nexus, Silicon Valley, etc. All that was geared up. Instead of using that technology to benefit humanity, they've used it to exert even more control of humanity.
Mhm.
And I would argue that in these underground bases where there's humans and non-humans working, side by side, that in a number of these bases, humans are not in control. That the non-human factor is who or what is calling the shots in some of these facilities.
Right. So let's get to the nitty-gritty here of these non-humans. Are they really in control of all of us? I mean, or just a portion? And is it them against us? And is there something to the white hats? Who are the white hats?
Well, to deal with the white hats first, as far as this large kind of network of good guys and good girls that are secretly working to undermine this, I don't put too much stock in that because, I mean, they can make a difference. Let's in a hypothetical example, let's say there are, for lack of a better term, white hats, right? They would have to operate. Ideally, they would have access to the technology we've been talking about. I do believe that there are deep black elements of the military aerospace community that have worked with this advanced technology and even have established alliances, treaties, understandings, if you will, with non-human civilizations. Okay, what the ultimate goal or agenda of these deep black military aerospace groups is? Are they just part of an extended network of this Draco Orion intergalactic empire, which just spread out to Earth, or are there factions within that construct that are trying to carve out a little piece of the action for themselves? And perhaps by so doing, oh, I think I lost you.
Can you hear
Oh, there
me?
you are. I can hear you now.
That was weird.
You just lost
Right?
stability for a second. The stability of
It,
the wormhole was, suffered some kind of external. Mm.
were you there the whole time?
Oh yeah, I was just looking at
Okay, good.
myself.
It was saying
Did
no
you?
internet, but I know I had internet.
Oh, did you hear that bit where I was talking about the white hats and stuff and the aerospace community and all that?
No, okay, so I lost you at the white hats, and there was something about the white hats where you didn't really give them too much credit. That
Yes,
was
yes. Okay, I elaborated more on that, but in a nutshell, I like to think yes, there are people within the system and outside the system that used to be in the system, and your average everyday good person who wants to turn this around. If you're going to call them white hats or someone's going to call them white hats, yes, I do believe that there are countless so-called white hats. But as far as a sub rosa, essentially uh, countervailing force to all this, if they're going to operate, they're going to have to operate under a lot of inhibitions if they don't have access to advanced alien technology, right? They're going to have to find secure comms. They're going to have to be able to move around freely undetected. They're going to have to be able to shift currency and money around electronically or otherwise. They're going to have to move around like a whole bunch of equipment, weaponry, logistics, etc., without being noticed,
mhm.
right? That's a tall order. It doesn't mean it's not being done, but we've seen this white hat notion taken to extremes where people are actually giving podcasts and saying, "Oh yes," and this happened in when Melbourne was first put into lockdown, and the people in Victoria. It's no surprise that they rose up first, right? At least voiced their sentiment, and my have they cracked down on them, but and demonized by the media. But uh, the, the notion that you know the restrictions and the lockdown was necessary so the white hats can rescue all the children in the underground bases in Melbourne. They don't want people to see this, so obey the restrictions, stay indoors, don't look out your window, because the white hats have got it covered. Okay, that's a non-starter for me. Okay,
Right.
if that's really happening, they don't need to lock down the whole service population of a huge area, metropolitan
Right.
Melbourne and surrounding outlying regions to do that. Okay, so you see this notion taken to extremes. It's there's a lot of hopium involved, a
Right.
lot of wishful thinking, right? Ultimately, we will prevail because there's more of us, and we operate from the basis of love, kindness, compassion, and that was what powers us. What they rely on: fear, intimidation, the lobotomizing effects of the corporate media, right? And really, at this point now, just to digress for a second, all their lies, all their blandishments, all their intimidation, that really only has effect now. And I mean global, not just in Australia, but globally. It's uh, it's overkill because the only ones they continue to fool are the sheeponoids anyway, and because most of the sheeponoids, got the treatment, and I think there'll come a point in time they're not even going to muck around with placebos or saline solutions or low dosages. I think at some point, when the boosters come around, that they're just going to, if they didn't get the those thus treated the first time around, they hit them with like a low dose or a placebo. They're going to get them with the boosters and the boosters after that and the boosters after that. So it's tied in with
So
Planet X.
there's some kind of truth to the fact that some of the treatments are just placebo, and that's why people can go around and say, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine," and then but some people are, you know, having
But
heart
that was
attacks.
factored into it because the ones that got the real treatments, they're also shutters because we know with absolute certainty some people are more vulnerable to shedding than others. I have personal friends who've become ill simply by getting around, the treated, right?
Right.
So, the way they've got it set up is they will use the ones that had the real treatments as vectors. And then by, the mask mandates also, people constantly breathing in their own bacteria and the carbon dioxide, they get sick, they get a chest infection, they go to these house of horrors, these chamber of horrors for treatments,
Hospitals.
hospitals, and then they get incubated to death or put into an induced coma. I mean, it's a chamber of horrors. But part of your question was, is there an alien force? Absolutely, there is, because what we're seeing is 100% inimical to human life, not only to human life, but all life here on the planet. I mean, they've made their position clear. If you listen to the interviews with Celeste Solum, she's talking
Who
about
is
how
that?
Celeste Solum, Sollum, she was interviewed by David Icke and a number of other people. And some of the stuff she said is some of the information that myself and my colleagues independently developed that not only did they want to change the DNA of everyone, and everyone thus treated is no longer technically human, especially if it was the mRNA variety. But I would argue that, just even the ones that don't have the messenger in it, because all of them have the graphene, all of them have the nanolipids and hydrogel, et cetera, which has the transceiver send receive capability as well as the ability to through pre-programmed uh, algorithms can self-assemble, right? Automatically, whether it's got the mRNA or not, that's changing people from the inside and out. And what we're also seeing is the abrupt personality changes of people who they're turning into complete mask holes. Some of these people obsessed with bullying, hectoring others to take the
Yeah.
treatment, and I mean, this is happening in the workplace where people that don't want that are being bullied unmercifully by these pod people, like in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? Hectored and bullied. They're being hectored and bullied by the TV. They're being hectored and bullied, by the politicians. So, uh, is it anti-human and alien in orientation? Absolutely, it is, because the occultic aspect behind it all. And occultic means just hidden, but also the esoteric, non-human aspects to it, the numerology, the gematria, all that ties into this. How they're being hoodwinked and brainwashed, and the spell casting going on at any given moment with the corporate media in Hollywood. So yes, it's meant to not only depopulate the surface population, but the potential exists, like we alluded to earlier, that a significant number of these people, even after they've shed their mortal coil, even after they've died from these treatments, one form or another, because they've been treated, they wind up getting plugged in their consciousness, potentially forever into this Tron-like hellish existence, right? So that's completely non-human. That's completely hijacking the soul, completely hijacking consciousness, and the way they're terraforming this planet too, making it basically, if the trend continues, eventually it'll be uninhabitable by normal human people. It'll just be so polluted, and that's what Celeste Solum suggested that too, because with the DNA, they're not only striving to change the DNA of people, but she pointed out, she's read a lot of the papers put out by these nuts, that they're working to change the polarity, the spin, the DNA, uh, of plants, of animals, of everything. So that to me is profoundly shocking. I mean, that's information, incidentally, that myself and my colleagues had independently developed. But Celeste Solum has that background. She can explain it in layman terms, because that's kind of what we figured out, that they're trying at some level to reverse the polarity of not just the solar system, but potentially the entire plane of existence. Because, when we think, let's scale things up, what are these beings really capable of doing, right? So, a line has to be drawn somewhere. And this is the toughest assignment you could imagine, right? Because a lot of your listeners, they could have chosen to stay in a higher dimensional place and just observe this, but they chose to go through the process of reincarnation again and again. And that's one of the problems too, is because of the sheepanoid hybridization agenda, where on the one hand, because they constantly strive to maintain the purity of the bloodlines, I'm talking about the reptilian hybrid plantation managers of this planet, right? On the one hand, but they also imbue a lot of these reptilian characteristics into the sheepanoid underclass, right? Which makes them so obedient, but also very aggressive, very stupid, and very overly emotional, unable to process, information that contradicts the programming that they've been subjected to. All of that are manifestations of this non-human intelligence, because I would argue that the behavior that's coming out of these people, even before all this madness, but especially now with the people that have been treated, and even if they haven't been treated yet, because of the never-ending onslaught of the propaganda and the mind control and the lobotomizing effects of the corporate media, I would say that they're totally entity infested. I would argue that what passes for their thoughts is a never-ending echo chamber of OCD thought loops, of everything is fear-driven, everything is fear-based. These people are afraid of their own shadows. They could be double treated, and they're still afraid of their own shadows, still afraid of people that don't social distance, still afraid. I mean, it's all fear and rage. That's all part of the reptilian R complex. So they've all been shunted into that lower vibratory frequency bandwidth, mentally, vibrationally. And that's where these controllers want us, because that way we don't expand and we don't, staying embodied, but, we don't connect with higher dimensions. We don't connect with organic source, right? We're just staying stuck in this frequency bandwidth of fear and rage and helplessness and despair and hopelessness. And I'm here to tell you folks, it's, we didn't come here to lose. What happens to the rest of humanity or what passes for humanity, that's their journey. But there will be a solid core of people like us. There's going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of trials and tribulations along the way, but we win by surviving, by overcoming. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And time, it may not seem like it, but time is on our side. These fundamental constants are changing. The illusionary nature of linear time is speeding up. Formally stable elements are exhibiting alarming instability, right? The fundamental constants are changing. Energy is constantly streaming in from the galactic core. And now what people have to enter into this is, you can believe whatever you want, listeners. I've done the research. I've seen it with my own eyes. Planet X, Nibiru, the red dwarf, whatever you want to call it, it's real. It's got its own mini solar system, and some of these planets and moons are quite large. I feel it's inhabited, right? And it's having manifold effects on our sun, on our planet. All of it is being explained away by climate change. If there was not this chemtrail haze above us, everyone on this planet would have seen the second sun by now. People, sheeponoids being what they are, if they don't notice a chemtrail being created right above them, why would they notice a second sun? I mean, that's the level of dumbing down we're talking about, right? But if that chemtrail haze was not there, everyone would have seen it by now. It's there, and I think it's getting closer. It's causing all these problems seismically, volcanoes, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why there's a sense of urgency on the part of the hybrid plantation managers to rush everything into place, because this solar system is subject to celestially driven cataclysms every 9 to 12,000 years, and they last for protracted periods of time once they really get going. Our entire solar system, not just Earth, is subject to horrific, sudden, but again can last over a period of time, cataclysms, which radically change the surface of the planet, could cause mass extinction levels of animals and people, and we're right there on the cusp again. It's come around again. So they want to speed up their agenda, but they're making mistakes by being so boorish and so pushy and so stupid, because they don't know any other way. There's just this reptile mentality of just bullying people and narcissistic, abuse mentality. It's causing people to draw a line in the sand and say, no, I've retreated as much as I'm going to retreat. I'm not going to retreat anymore. You want to wipe everyone else out, that's fine with me. And one quick point before I'd like to hear your thoughts on this is the apartheid system they're setting up for the treated and the untreated. And I look at this from a Sun Tzu perspective. Am I heartily sick of the never-ending impositions on my personal freedom? You can't do this, you can't go there, you can't. Of course I am. But the way I look at it, and this is the way Sun Tzu looked at it, our greatest weakness is our greatest strength. Sounds kind of like a paradox. Oh, that's some kind of weird, obscure Oriental stuff, Bartley. No, there's something to that. Because if they're going to make it like so only treated shedders can sit in restaurants, I don't want to be there anyway. So if they want to set up like a ghetto, if they want to set up a ghetto system, and they think that they're excluding us, but they're actually herding all the treated into these what amount to ghettos. Think of, like the Warsaw Ghetto and other ghettos in World War II. And I don't want to be around them anyway. Why would I want to sit there in a restaurant where the cooks have been treated, the waiters have been treated, the people taking my payments have been treated, the other diners have been treated? They'll be kicking out spikes left, right, and center. Why would I want to mix with them? So if they want to create this segregated apartheid system, fine. I'll eat at home. I just won't engage with that. I don't want to be around them anyway. Why would I want to be around a bunch of entity-infested people freaking out, right? And sitting there dining, and suddenly someone just keels over and starts spazzing out. Why would I want to see that or be a part of that. So if they want to create this apartheid system, that's fine with me. Because that's another reason why I'm not engaging. So people need to keep that in mind. It may seem like it's initially that it's segregationist, it's discriminatory. Absolutely, it's all of that. But in the long run, this is just how I feel. No one else has to feel this. I don't want to be around to treat it anyway. They're the ones spreading all this stuff, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I kind of felt weird after a couple of the people got treated at work. I started having some weird feelings and issues. And so hopefully that has passed. But um so you were talking about Planet X and how there's a certain deadline for the new world order types to hurry up with their agenda, and that's why they're making mistakes and they're just being, bullish and things. What is the deadline? I mean, what does it have to do with Planet X? Is there some kind of a big event that's happening that's coming?
Well, there's a lot of talk about how there may be a stage alien invasion sometime in the future. I would argue that if there is a stage alien invasion, it's because the reptilians want there to be a stage alien invasion. It's got nothing to do with humans deciding independently that, oh, we're going to have a fake alien invasion when this whole control system is run by non-humans working through hybridized human aliens, right? When you look at these boorish, mentally, psychologically, verbally abusive people on TV hectoring us, badgering us, calling us idiots, if you look at them, they're not bloody human. Look at their facial structure. Just if one knows what they're looking for, what I see is a raging, foaming at the mouth reptilian human hybrid, a Draco human hybrid. So the consciousness going through them, and they would not have been elevated to that position had they not had the right pedigree as far as DNA profile, overabundance of reptilian DNA, and with that comes no impulse control, no frontal lobe capacity, no empathy, no conscience, sadism, right? And then, if they need to, they'll blackmail, a lot of these people through one way or another, and then, give them their cushy life. And as long as they do what they're supposed to do, but they don't realize they're ultimately expendable too, because if, as I suspect, one or more of these alien races return to what they regard to as their property anyway, right? It's possible that one of these returning groups is part of this Planet X and the Nibiru system. This is what and I didn't buy everything Sitchin said because I considered Sitchin at some level to be controlled opposition, and he and I had kind of an argument one time because he didn't like the fact I was talking about reptilians, right? Uh, but if I think that the Anunnaki themselves are reptilian or something like reptilians or reptilian hybrids at least. And if they're so advanced that they can live in this, what amounts to like a planetary spaceship and come in and out of this solar system every 3,600 years or thereabouts, which, we think in linear terms, to them, that's like a blink of the eye. And then they come back here. They never really left. They've had their own agents and, you know, um, plantation managers here. But now at least some of them are coming back in this Planet X system. And again, everyone on this planet, from a control New World Order standpoint, has a shelf life, an expiration date. They may decide, and maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, I don't know. It's just a feeling I get because there's a lot of suspicion and mistrust and factionalized infighting amongst these various alien reptilian groups too. What if these aliens, these reptilians coming back in this mini star system, solar system, decide, yeah, these idiots that we left in charge, they've really screwed things up. We're not going to need their services anymore. Besides, they're not really like us. They're half breeds anyway, right? Oh, sure, some of them can shapeshift, the half breeds and do all that and turn into full blown reptilians. But there's a rigid hierarchical structure at work where the white Draco from the reptilian scheme of things, they sit at the top and then they have all their minions down below, and they actually will subjugate and enslave other reptilian races to do their bidding for them, either use them as slaves or compel them to do work for them. Not all reptilians are free agents. A lot of them are compelled to do what they're. So the possibility exists that these beings in the Planet X and the Nibiru system, for lack of a better term, like I said, every one working in this Luciferian control system, they have a shelf life, so to speak. Just like the lower level minions in the military, law enforcement, the bureaucrats. At a surface level, when the communists take over, as they've done throughout history, they just get rid of the local infrastructure. Your services are no longer needed. Why should we trust you? You betrayed your own people. Get out of here. We're getting rid of you, right? What if the same mentality exists for these reptilians that are coming back in force that may be part of this Planet X system? What if they look down and they say, these idiots we left in charge are just screwing everything up, right? Let's get rid of them. And so if there is a fake alien invasion, I would argue that it's the reptilians behind it, not these hybridized, because the ones in control are hybridized reptilian humans anyway. It's not humans that are coming up with all this, right? They're hybridized humans at different ends of the spectrum. The vast majority hybridized shibanoids that are incapable of processing any of this, and I'm making heads or tails of any of this, and different gradations along the spectrum, and then you get to the extreme end of the spectrum, and they're just raving, foaming in the mouth, shape-shifting reptilians, right? Well, they may have a shelf life too. They may be determined to be expendable, and not all of them will have off-world capability. Not all of them will have the clearance or the pull to get to the underground bases when these cataclysms erupt on the surface. There have been advanced civilizations living beneath the earth countless millennia, right? And they've been able to ride out all these storms on the surface. But, like a lot of these surface level maggots that you see on the surface is hectoring and bullying and badgering, the viewing audience. I doubt that many of them have the means to get off world or to, go underground. I think that when the time comes, they're just going to be left to, die on the surface, basically. Because when these cataclysms start really kicking in, I think we'll see a lot of changes between now and 2025, which is only a scant 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of talk about the Las Palmas, Cumbra Vieja, and I read a novel about this rogue British SAS guy whose family is Iranian, and he was raised in England and went to public school and speaks with a posh English accent, and then he has this experience in the occupied territories in Israel, Palestine, and then he converts to Islam, and then becomes like this world evil terrorist who takes over Hamas, but he's using all his SAS know-how and mentality to do it, right? So he works out a deal. Spoiler alert, if anyone wants to read the novel, written by Patrick Robinson. Spoiler alert, I can't remember if he worked out a deal with the Chinese or the North Koreans, but he obtained a submarine, a couple of them, I think. And then he got sailors from Iran to crew the submarines, and then obtained cruise missiles with nuclear warheads, and launched nuclear cruise missiles at Cumbra Vieja in the Canary Islands, because if it sets off like this massive volcanic explosion, the magma will superheat all the water. It'll blow apart the volcano and cause a mega landslide, several miles long, solid rock and soil just plunges into the ocean, creating mega tsunamis. And that was the guy's intention, the terrorist, the former SAS guy. I'm going to blow up this volcano. It's going to cause a mega landslide. It's going to cause mega tsunamis in the U.S. Eastern Seaboard, Europe, South America, right? And so when all this talk started coming out about Cumbra Vieja and the volcano there at Las Palmas, I was like, where have I heard this before? Then I dug up the novel and I started flipping through the pages. Yeah, so this thought form of Cumbra Vieja blowing its top, causing a landslide, causing tsunamis, whether it's predictive programming or whatever the case may be, that thought form, that concept has been out there for some time. So let's see how this plays out, because worldwide there are volcanoes going off in a lot of places, and they're explaining it all away as climate change, of course. But and some of it may be induced by scalar Tesla, uh, seismic type weaponry, right? HARP type stuff. On the other hand, that technology may be done on top of piggybacking on top of the effects Planet X, the mini solar system, is having on our planet, because the correct model is the plasma electric model of the universe, right? So it's all energetically interlinked. And so when the sun reacts, it's going to have an impact on the earth with coronal mass ejections, et cetera, et cetera. So it's action at a distance, what Professor James McCanny calls action at a distance. We don't have to be hit by a transiting, um, a very large planetary body passing through our solar system. It just the effects it has energetically is enough to cause serious issues here on this planet, including an increase in seismic and volcanic activity. So that kind of, um, and like I said, on top of that, they may piggyback scalar weapons and what have you, to exacerbate these these seismic events, which are being influenced by Planet X. Okay, so but I see all that as acts of desperation. There's nothing logical. I mean, if you look at it from a demented point of view, I guess it makes sense. But any kind of logic, any kind of human earthly compassion, no, it's completely absent. So, the point of relevance is, I think that Planet X is an inhabited system. I think that some of these beings, a lot of these beings are coming back to reclaim perhaps what they feel is theirs. They may be in conflict with other beings that think they own this place, right? Because there's more than
Oh,
one
wow.
claimant, right? Because these intergalactic wars between spacefaring and dimension hopping civilizations have gone on for millions of years in linear time. So they've never really stopped. This is just an extension of what's been going on throughout, our galaxy, an extension of the Orion Wars, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I think, where we're at now. We're going to see, the curtain raising on, if not the final act,
Oh,
at
yeah.
least maybe the act leading up to the final act, as far as what's going to happen to the rest of humanity.
So I have, bear with me. I've got kind of a few questions and I'm going to roll through them so I
Yeah,
don't
sure.
forget them. So, initially, you talk about the Luciferian. What'd you say about the Luciferian mindset or the Luciferian group or whatever? Um, and how that's involved. I think that's involved with the New World Order and the Nazi. And who exactly is Lucifer in, as to them? And and then you said about the bloodline too. And is Lucifer a bloodline? And does that stem from, is possibly Lucifer AI, or or is it is it an alien? So fill me in on that part. And then um why would their agenda want them to be linked? Basically, what I'm getting is that they want everyone to be online, basically in the cloud, connected. How does that fit in with the Lucifer agenda? And um, the last question that I had, because I know I'm gonna forget if I don't like grasp a hold of this right now, is um, so why would they want to kill people off? So part of the treatment is to eliminate a lot of the people. But if they're trying to eliminate all of the people, why do they want all the people online per se? And is that um, so the rest of the people left on the surface will just be what, robots, or just slaves, or And then the final act being, when Planet X comes and the Anunnaki come down and they see what's happened. Um, is that will that be something good for humanity, or will that be another scary, where they don't care about us either? No, that was a lot, but
Well, let me start with the Lucifer / AI bit first. There's a school of thought. There might be something to this. Wes Penra talks a lot about this in his papers, where Lucifer is just one name for one of these Anunnaki guys, and the names vary. Uh, Marduk, Ra in the Egyptian cosmology, uh, et cetera, et cetera. Right in Saul Alinsky's book Rules for Radicals, and so much of what is taught in the schools today, so much of what the hybrid plantation manager, lower level, mid level minions believe, a lot of that comes out of Saul Alinsky's doctrines, and he dedicated his book to the first rebel, which is Lucifer, right? So right there in the forward of his book, he says this book is dedicated to the first rebel, Lucifer, and it's the whole concept of order out of chaos, where you bring all these disparate strands together in a centralized command and control system, and you let everything go to hell, or you enable things to go to hell. In the meantime, it's like constructive chaos, for example. And there's a loosh feeding element to that. All the misery, all the chaos, all the human suffering, because these beings traffic in human suffering. It provides an emotional, energetic harvest to them, and it sears us and it scars us emotionally, psychologically, karmically, even, because until we dismantle this matrix setup, I don't want to say that we're stuck in this karmic wheel, but it seems like, because this is their scheme of things, it seems like they're not on the karmic wheel, some of them. Because if we believe karma the way it's presented to us by certain people, who give lectures and write papers and what have you, everyone is on the karmic wheel. Everyone at some point will answer for their crimes and their bad judgment and bad errors. I would argue that a lot of these truly evil sewer scum, Hillary Clinton, people like them, they just get recycled. They come back as another evil person. So there's nothing really for them to learn on a spiritual level, because they don't want to evolve. If anyone is fear based, it's these Luciferians. Because perish the thought that they can lose control of all these, sheepanoid people, and they won't be able to divide and conquer us and manipulate us and give us bad food and everything, because they're essentially parasites, right? So they're the ones that are most fear based. So rather than let us evolve organically on our own, and spiritually and um, from a resonant standpoint, evolve beyond their control, that perish the thought they're gonna do what they can to keep us down at a lower frequency bandwidth. And where Lucifer, okay, let's say for the argument, Lucifer really is one of these beings, one of these Anunnaki, under a whole host of different names, depending on what culture, what era on this planet. Lucifer represents, perhaps a faction of these beings. And what they filtered down through their esoteric teachings, fraternal, fraternal orders, what have you, they've created this one massive global cult that worships, venerates, offers up sacrifices, what have you, to Lucifer. And Lucifer, to me, Lucifer is probably some kind of reptilian, kind of omnipotent type of being. But I think there's also an AI overlay to that as well. AI has been around for a long time. They just had to make it seem as if it was organically, independently created by bright humans. But I would argue that these bright humans that came up with AI themselves were hybridized, entity infested individuals that had all this information coursing through their consciousness, which they may or may not have thought was their own musings and their own inspirations, but they're being guided to be in these R&D think tanks and biotech places in the first place. And then, magically, they have all these agendas and formulas to work with. So the AI aspect enables them to hijack the consciousness after they've wiped out the surface population through these treatments and other things, wars, and that could still be on the table. There could still be at least a limited nuclear exchange in the works at some point in the future. Because from an environmental standpoint, a high background radiation count may not be good for us, but that doesn't mean it's not good for them. It could be beneficial to them.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have to remember. That's what terraforming is all about. Right.
But can I jump in there? So maybe
Yep.
the treatment and all the radiation and all the poisons is makes a vessel or a body easier for them to inhabit, and but the treatment and being linked in to the cloud, um, does it just make it easier for them to jump in or talk to us or?
I think, and this is just me saying this, but I've had discussions with colleagues about it. The AI quantum cloud aspect comes in. Okay, they've killed off all these people, they've shed their mortal coils, but they've still hijacked their consciousness. So what can they do with their consciousness? Now, before they die, each one of those individuals that have this working through them, they are like an individual part of a large phased ray antenna setup, kind of, you know what I mean? Where at any moment, with the 5G and 6G, etc., and probably even before they roll that stuff out, they probably have the means to influence their behavior already. Because I think that there are entities ready to jump into them, as well as these commands and remote influencing voice to skull, etc., etc. So they're already going to be like that before they shed their mortal coil. So when they shed their mortal coil and they've been hijacked, the consciousness and what passes for their soul, what's left of it, is hijacked. It can go into some kind of a quantum cloud, but it can still be utilized. It can still be utilized as an energy source. That consciousness, thus trapped in some big Faraday cage or something, can be directed, right? Probably directed off-world, probably even directed towards other distant star systems where the people there have rebelled against all this crap. So they're going to use them. They're going to weaponize them in some way, right? In the same way that like digital currency and Bitcoin is traded and all that stuff. And then ideally it's used as a form of commerce in exchange for goods and services. The potential exists that these consciousnesses, thus hijacked, can be weaponized in some way, used not just to barter amongst themselves, but utilized in some kind of weaponized, exploitative manner, not only in this solar system but elsewhere. Because distance and time means nothing to them. It's action at a distance. So it's possible with all of these consciousnesses thus trapped that they can focus that collective intent and commands and work through them, right? We know what one psychic remote viewer can do. We know what one psychic, very good psychic reader can do. Imagine hordes of these consciousnesses. They've already shed their mortal coil. They're stuck in some AI quantum cloud somewhere, and they're just being utilized by these controllers, reptilians, Draco, mantis beings, mostly, but they're cosmic vassals as well.
So
They're
they're
just
harvesting
utilized.
souls. They're
Yes.
harvesting souls and they're keeping them trapped in some kind of a cloud. And isn't that kind of sort of what the devil or whatever wants is to steal the souls, separate them from the God source? And isn't that the game? Isn't that the why we're here?
Yes, because I can't think of a more hellish existence than to be cut off from source for all eternity. Anyone who's gone through astral detentions will tell you that when you're in an astral detention scenario at night and your physical body, by all appearances, you're laying there asleep, but your consciousness has been hijacked, it's stuck somewhere. and time, quote unquote, is passing excruciatingly slow. You can't get out of this place, right? And you know you're there. You know it's not a dream. And also, many of us abductees in my labs, we've been astrally abducted. So it's not a theory for us, right?
Right.
Every one of just about every person who's had legitimate alien abduction experiences or legitimate my lab / project people, MK type experiences, has been astrally abducted. So that's not a theory. So if they can do that individually, and you scale it up, planet full of my labs and project people and abductees, imagine if everyone has got the treatment, potentially their consciousness can be hijacked, abducted, detained in potentially indefinitely if we don't turn this around, right? So the stakes are that high, and that's another thing that these all these minions of this system better understand. I'm not doing this for their benefit. I'm not saying this, right? I'm not trying to plant seeds of doubt in them, because to me it doesn't matter what they do, right? But if they refuse the treatments, they're automatically behind the eight ball, like what's happened to the U.S. military personnel who refuse the treatments. But if they accept the treatments, whether they realize it or not, the potential exists that they could find themselves, their consciousness, trapped in a Tron-like, hellish quantum existence in some nether dimension, potentially forever. All right. So,
Wouldn't that be like cloning? Isn't that what kind of sort of happens to cloning? Where they can take your consciousness and put it into a artificial being. So then the treatment is just another aspect to do that, or on a grand scale, or is it might it just be separate still?
well, we already know from a MyLab alien abductee perspective that we have clones, for lack of a better term, that they can take our consciousness from our sleeping body, place it into a physical 3D clone that may be enhanced in some way to have more metaphysical powers and capabilities. And then that clone with an aspect of our consciousness inside of it. And the consciousness could have an alter in it that has a different personality, a different mindset, a different understanding of its own capabilities and limitations, and then they put it through its paces in a clone body. And I know of a number of cases where in these ops and in training inside clone bodies, when their clone bodies have been maimed or they've been killed, right? They simply just send the consciousness back to the sleeping person, or if they want to continue the training or the op, they just put it into another clone. I just started watching the other night Avatar, right? I'd only seen it once a long time ago. I don't really remember the details, but it was interesting how that whole thing was set up, where they created this genetically, as much as possible, they try to duplicate, imitate the biology of a given, from our perspective, would be an alien race, but they're native to a particular planet. And then they train these guys as avatars to put their consciousness into these bodies and then mix with the native population. Now, the novelist of the book, the Area 51 series, he also, under another pen name, wrote a series of novels about a Green Beret Special Forces guy. Anyway, in his Area 51 novels, one of the books was about these Avatar guys, these American Special Forces guys trained to astrally project and utilize these avatars to do these superhuman metaphysical feats, right? So even that concept of using the consciousness in avatars or in clone bodies, the concept has already been out there in book form. It's already been out there in cinema, but in actual fact, those kinds of things have already been done to alien abductees in my lab. So if we scale it up, getting back to the whole treatment syndrome, the potential exists that they can do something similar to that, but on a grand scale, right? Using billions, potentially billions of consciousness that's trapped. And they don't have to be advanced souls. Ideally, they would like every advanced soul to be trapped in this quantum hellish existence forever. But just even, all these people that just go along or believe whatever they're told, they would have a usefulness too, because it's a force multiplier. The commands, the directives, the energy being sent and working through them can be collectively amplified, like a big, huge radar array. Think about it like that. The beam in any direction, to do whatever they want. So, and I don't know if I answered your question, but at least I answered it in part. And what was before we leave? What was the other two questions you had? Refresh my memory.
Why would so what's the purpose of killing everyone off if they are really I don't let's see which part Lucifer being potentially an alien slash AI, we covered that. And then so when Planet X comes back, do you think that there's a larger threat to humanity, or do you think that they're going to come back and the ones they left in charge, the hybrids, are going to be served some wrath because they were left in charge and look what they've done?
Well, they're not going to need them, even if they didn't leave them in charge. Them coming back the way they have, they may decide, the ones returning in the Planet X system may decide, no, I think we'll take care over this place and we'll do a better job of it, right, in our scheme of things. So I think that the depopulation agenda was there all along. Like I said, if they hadn't, chemtrailed the sky so much, just about everyone would have seen the second sun by now. In the past, pre-chemtrails, native traditional cultures would have been running around like Chicken Little, freaking out. Two suns in the sky. That's a bad omen traditionally, because when things like that manifest in the past, and back then they had more of an institutionalized memory, even in cultures that didn't have the written word, the truth would still filter down to the present time, as long as there wasn't these hybridized priesthoods running things and squelching and hiding information, manipulating people, right? At least in some of these traditional shamanic type societies, the real information, the passing of Atlantis, Lemuria, etc., through cataclysms of one sort or another, they were well known. In the Native American cultures, they were well known that the earth goes through these cleansings every once in a while, whether it's by fire, whether it's by water, whatever the case may be. So whether or not there were these controllers here doing all this stuff, these mass extinction events would happen anyway. We're on the cusp of them. So it seems to me that they're just piggybacking all these efforts. These people are going to be wiped out anyway. That's their demented, twisted thinking. Let's milk them. Let's get our money's worth out of them. Milk them for all they're worth. Make them war against each other. Let's turn the whole planet into a big loosh emotional energy harvesting factory and feed us at their expense. And then get rid of them, because they're going to be gotten rid of anyway by the celestially driven cataclysms. And Planet X coming back, it's just a big part of that, right? And that's not the only thing, right? I mean, the constant stream of energy coming in from the galactic core, these large comets coming through, transiting through the solar system. The Planet X system has it's dragging behind it a very large debris field. So that's why we've had so many bolides, so many meteorites, so many near misses. We just had another one, apparently, an asteroid recently passed by. So these things this mass extinction level event was going to happen anyway. So they just decided to piggyback their efforts on top of already naturally occurring processes, right? But the thing is, in the past, survivors, they went underground, or they sought the high ground, and pockets of them survived. The difference this time is, yes, or finding refuge in the underground cavern systems. This time, they have to somehow avoid the treatment, the stabs, right? They have to somehow avoid that, and then be able to ride out the storm. And then they may throw into the mix a major war between China and the U.S., and which results maybe in a limited tactical nuclear exchange or a larger nuclear exchange. We don't know. But these are the factors we have to keep in mind. But the point of relevance is, the odds are definitely stacked against us. I don't know if any of our predecessors having to deal with celestially driven cataclysms in the past had to avoid getting treated like we do. But if we can somehow avoid all that, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. We get to the finish line, a lot of this will resolve itself, because I think the hybrid plantation managers, I personally don't think that these beings that are coming back are going to, if they're going to keep them around, it's only to run the place, but they're not going to be in charge, and then they may be expendable at some point. So we'll just have to wait and see, because like I said, even in that societal structure, it's the reptilians that created the caste system, right? So even amongst their own species, there are elite reptilians, not so elite, lower class reptilians, et cetera, et cetera. They're the ones that created the caste system, which humans imitated, right? So they may decide at some point that these hybrid plantation managers are surplus to our needs.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up real quick with just some of my thoughts, and then this has been an amazing, really, some things have come to my mind that are really clearing some up, and then I'm gonna do some research. Um, I really do think, James, that the key that you said, that love is really the key, that vibration, that higher vibration, because based on just the ghost hunting and the paranormal things, I know for a fact that I think that the demons are the aliens, are the reptilians. I think they're just like there's levels of spirits. There's levels of the demons. I think it's all the same thing, and they can attach to you at that lower frequency. And the only reason why they're here right now is because of the fear and the fighting and all the lower vibrational things that they're doing to us. Because once we continue with our love, love, love in the higher frequencies, they don't get to exist anymore. So I don't know what if that makes any sense to you or anybody else, but um I just want to say thanks again, James. If I have any questions, can I hit you up and then have you
Absolutely.
respond? And then I'm also going to be asking you for some other resources in case any of the viewers out there are newer and they want to look into some of the other people that you've talked about. And I'm definitely going to be putting your webpage and some information. I'm going to go ahead and stop this right now, but I just want to let you know that I'm gonna do a quick edit for you so you can get it on your cosmic switchboard, and then I'm gonna take some time and I'm gonna insert some other information as well. Or I'll give you the copies of those too. So,
Yes,
all
by all
right,
means. Yeah, thank you
all
so much for
right.
having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, James. I hope things get better over there, and let's keep in touch. All right,
Absolutely.
all right, all right. Have a good day.
You too.
All right, bye. Well, I just wrapped up another amazing interview with James Bartley, and he really opened my mind to a lot of things. He gave me a lot of things to think about. And I'll be putting out some information for everybody as well. And like I said, one thing that really triggered me is the revelations. Now, the revelations, I think that the people that are interpreting them are a little bit misled, and I think they're still trying to follow a certain narrative. Um, it's really symbolic. I'm going to look into the revelations and where I see the treatments being how they going to fit in there. And there's some stories out there, some books and things called Left Behind, and the first, people that are taken, and the certain things like that I'm going to try to make some comparisons to what's happening from the treatment. Um, as far as some of the visions that I've had, I when James was talking, I just it really some of the visions that I've had that were so strong that have stuck with me actually just came back to mind when James was talking about the cataclysms that happen every so many thousands of years, and the fact that the people left behind will have to, you know, deal with trying to survive certain things. Now, one of the visions that I had was, I want to say this was about I don't know, 10 years ago, and I had this vision where I was on the beach, um, and I was facing the ocean, and I looked to the right of me and I saw Chinese paratroopers coming down from the sky, and there was quite a few of them, and the reason I knew they were Chinese is because they had that red circle, some kind of a red circle on their uniforms. And then after I saw the paratroopers coming down, I looked towards the ocean and I saw this huge, huge, huge tsunami coming to the beach. And the tsunami was red in color. And I immediately thought to myself, I have to get to higher ground. So I started running up the mountainside, and I was actually running upstairs, stairs that were going up and around the mountain, almost like, I want to say DNA, or raising in vibration, or going up the stairs, um, ascending. And then there were people running with me, and we were all just running up the stairs. And then when we finally got to the top and there was nowhere left to run, we all turned around and we looked, and the water had already reached to the level of that bottom stairs. So, like, my feet were right here, and then right here was the water level, and it was completely covering everything. And so there really may be some truth to this whole awakening and ascending, to this whole thing, raising your vibration, and something like and that nature. And then another vision that I had more recently was about a year ago, and I think I've told several people about this, is um, after the CV-19 first hit last year, and they were talking about the masks and everything. And so I went into meditation to see and to ask what was coming. And what I saw was some I saw a woman crying, and she was just really, traumatized and crying and just weeping. And then I saw another woman. She looked like she was sweating, and she had been working hard and been through a lot. She was very thin, and she was just like scared and walking like, oh my God, like she had been traumatized. So there was going to be a lot of trauma coming to us. And then after that, I saw what looked like my setup right here that I have in a podcast with the dividers and everything in the spotlight. Actually saw that. And then after that, the next part of the vision was, there's a outdoors, in Red Rock Canyon. There's an outdoor theater in the park where there's a stage, and people can go out and sit on the grass and watch the show. And and so I saw everybody sitting in the grass waiting for the show to start. And so and it was dark. So, and that to me is very symbolic of what they're saying right now. And if you listen to the news, and even what James said, that there's a show, and this is the final act, and everybody is waiting in the dark, waiting for the final act of this show or this script. This is not the first time that I've heard that we are in a living um, stage where all the world's a stage and everyone has a script and a part. And then to continue on in the vision, what happened next was there was this huge amount of light just coming down from the sky and lit up, and it actually lit up the people on the ground waiting for the show, to the point of where they were looking up like, oh my God, and I just remember being a part of that light and looking down. And so I don't know whether if that is some kind of a, maybe that's the alien invasion, maybe that is an increase in light is coming. There's, I don't know if that's have to do with maybe a nuclear event. I'm not sure. So that's what I do know is coming, and we're waiting for the light. I do watch a lot of these, or I do follow a lot of these posts about the energy coming in, and then about these the solar events that are happening and things like that, where there's a lot of light coming in as well. This being the golden age and being on the galactic plane, that we're going to be getting more light. Now, is that a good thing? Is that light coming from source? Where's this light coming from? I'll have to do some more um, meditating, but I do get visions and other things, just random, sometimes just words or pictures or things. And they did say and that it's going to be very hard. So there's a lot coming. And then, so one of the things that does concern me about this Lucifer agenda and the Luciferian uh, agenda, I guess. And if you read about Alice Bailey and the Lucis Trust and some of those other early writers that are actually that were the spiritualists for the communists, they talk about the incoming light. They talk about the Luciferic. They claim that Lucifer is the light. They're also trying to claim that Lucifer and Jesus are the same, and that Jesus was called the morning star, and so was Lucifer, and things like that. So there really is a lot of information that's being it's just two sides of the same coin, and so you're going to take this side or that side, and that's the division that they want us to have. So good versus evil and things like that. And it's just the same. It's just a lot of the same things that light versus dark and things like that, that they're just spinning. And a lot of the new agey stuff is really just their version of the other side of all the dark. So there's this love and light, new agey aspect where people can fall into, where basically it's like, no, go ahead and stick your head in the sand. Don't look. It doesn't, if you don't believe in it, it's not happening. And we're waiting for a savior, and just trust in this or just trust in that. It's all going to be okay. Just follow orders, just do the right thing. Take the treatments for your family, take the treatment so we can all get along. Take the treatment so that, stop being stubborn, do the right thing, the whole thing like that. But now I've also gotten visions and things like that where they do want us all to be connected to the web or to the internet. They do want us technically all online. They want everybody. They want everyone connected to the World Wide Web. And from what James said, it's that whole with the treatment. I think the treatment and the subsequent, the subsequent boosters and things are all just to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and it's a trial to see what is the most the treatment they can give us without killing us. You just hear so many different versions of the truth. They want to kill everyone, but they want to extract everyone's essence or being or soul and keep it hostage in some kind of a cloud area. And so one of the things that made me really think about this, about the whole alien agenda and everything is, and being demonic, and is the fact that supposedly Satan wants your soul, and that's what he's trying to do. And like I was telling James, And so when you are possessed, or when a person is possessed, you're talking about the same kind of um, personality traits or behaviors or symptoms as someone that has this parasite or this alien attached to them. And so to end this little um, afterthought of mine was the fact that we are searching the paranormal, and it's a very important. I believe that the paranormal investigations that are going on, um, if we could really open our eyes to the fact that it's very valid. It's very valid right now to come forward with some conclusive, and with the paranormal community and the research that's going on. If people could kind of connect the dots a little bit and realize that a lot of people are getting taken over or possessed and do have these overlays, reptilian overlays, these attachments, and that they're basically exactly what James is talking about as far as what their agenda is. Their agenda is to go after the souls, and whether they want to disguise this as demonic possessions or whatever, it's the same thing. And so to end this, I'm going to be doing some more research and formulating some more thoughts about how we can survive this. So, and as far as keeping our immune systems high, keeping love in our hearts, keeping our vibrations high, awakening, raising our vibration to the point where those things can't attach. But that's easier said than done, number one. So that's why it's so important right now that we join together with not only the paranormal ghost hunting, the psychics, people like Duncan who are like the exorcists, and we're all working together. Okay, this is all the same information that we need to come together and start making sense of it, start piecing it together, and we can understand really what's happening to us. This is a war for our souls, for our very souls, whether we're calling them aliens, demons, ghosts, past lives. It's all interrelated, interconnected. So I'm going to close this out right now, and I'm going to just say thanks again for listening and watching. I will be hopefully putting together some more information for everybody, and hope everyone stays tuned to my tunnel talk. And everyone, thanks again for tuning in.